In 2023, are independent filmmakers better off on their own or with a distributor? Let's get into it. I'm Jay Horton. I make movies that make money. This is how. Generally speaking, if you're releasing an independent film in 2023, I think that you're better off with a distributor or a distribution platform like FilmHUB or an aggregator such as Bitmax than you are on your own. Now, some will argue that using FilmHUB or Bitmax to distribute your movie is basically self-distribution, but that's not really the way I see it. To me, true DIY self-distribution is not using any middlemen to get to the platforms and or the consumers. It's selling off your own website, selling physical media direct to consumers, or directly dealing with major platforms like Amazon, which is pretty easy to do, at least with Amazon, or Vimeo, or making direct deals with harder to reach platforms like Tubi. But I honestly don't know many filmmakers that have those kind of direct deals with anyone outside of Amazon. For the most part, for me, it was by using either a distributor or FilmHUB that I've seen most of the revenue from my films over the course of my career. Now, that said, there was a time when I was seeing a hefty chunk from Amazon all on my own, and there are filmmakers that are still doing that, but by and large, it's not the case. Here's the positive thing about DIY distribution. Even if it's not my favorite method right now, it can be useful, at least as a component. The plus is you are in complete control. Anything you make on that movie is yours. There's little to no risk of a middleman ripping you off. And while it's not my preferred method, there are many filmmakers that do completely DIY distribution, and they do just fine. It is a valid approach. And for the right filmmakers, these returns can be great. A couple of things though. If you are considering a completely DIY approach, you better be damn good at marketing or have a huge built-in audience or following for your particular project and a way to reach that audience. The important thing if you're going to go this route is you just have to realize that all the audience building responsibility falls solely on you. There is no built-in audience to help. But if you've really done the groundwork and built up a strong, dedicated fan base, this can make for some of the biggest short-term gains a filmmaker can make. To be honest, aside from a few direct deals that I use in conjunction with FilmHUB, I have pretty much abandoned the DIY approach when it comes to distribution. Every now and then, I do occasionally try a new project through Prime Video Direct on Amazon and try to sell direct TVOD. And I have created a few direct relationships with some platforms, unfortunately not Tubi, that do see me some revenue. And YouTube is actually starting to pay off for me a bit when it comes to putting some of these movies out. And yeah, I guess I would consider releasing on YouTube DIY distribution. But to my way of thinking, even if you are going to do DIY, a more hybrid approach is more ideal. In 2022, I released around a dozen films, and none of them were complete DIY releases, although many did use a DIY component. And look, I understand a lot of filmmakers' desire to cut those middlemen out and go direct to the consumer, and to my way of thinking, that can be a great component of a film distribution strategy. But I think it's just plain bad business to rely solely on one thing and ignore something else. For example, there's a movement here on YouTube of filmmakers talking about only releasing movies on YouTube. And look, don't get me wrong, I am not bagging on YouTube here. I use YouTube to distribute films. It's just not my only place to distribute films. I mean, YouTube is a totally valid place to try and release your films, but why limit yourself? That just makes no sense to me. To solely count on that, you're just leaving money on the table. And making money on indie films is so hard. Why would you make it harder? There's just too much value to be gained by diversifying your distribution strategy. There's also a lot of value on getting your movies onto platforms that audiences are already using, besides just YouTube. And that's really the rub. When it comes to DIY, you just can't get on to most of the platforms that really matter. And by matter, I mean the ones where filmmakers are at least seeing some money. Most of the time, getting on a lot of these platforms necessitates either having a distributor, an aggregator, or a distribution platform like FilmHUB. I can hear filmmakers saying, well, I'm just going to sell the movie off my website or on Vimeo or Gumroad. And I'm like, great, absolutely do that. Maybe even start there exclusively. But eventually, even if it does well, it will fall off. Then what? What is the harm at that point in widening out onto other streaming platforms? Answer, there isn't any. And here's another thing. DIY is tough. For me anyway, getting a new audience to check out one of my movies off my own website or buying a Blu-ray directly from me is difficult, especially if you haven't done it and haven't built up that kind of trust yet, especially in comparison to using a distributor or market to get onto bigger platforms where it's easier to reach an audience. And that audience is used to frequenting that platform. And as far as Amazon Prime Video Direct goes, they're pretty much done dealing with indies. You can still get up there for rental and purchase, most likely, but SVOD is totally a no-go for indie films on Amazon, unless you're going through a distributor or FilmHUB. That's not to say that you can't do very well on Amazon TVOD on your own. I recently interviewed a filmmaker that earned over $100,000 this year on Amazon alone, just on TVOD. And his earnings there dwarfed what he's seen on Tubi and other platforms through FilmHUB. But there's a couple things. One, that's a very unique situation. By and large, more smaller movies are earning more money on places like Tubi than on Amazon TVOD by a good stretch. And even though Amazon did way better for him, Tubi and the others, they didn't earn nothing. Whatever money this filmmaker did earn off Tubi and those other platforms was money that he wouldn't otherwise have. Like I said earlier, why limit yourself? Why leave money on the table, even if it's only a little bit of money? Now, with the exception of Tubi and maybe half a dozen others, most streaming platforms are tiny and inconsequential, at least for now in terms of earnings. But it's not a waste of time. Keep in mind that 7 years ago, Tubi TV was one of those little inconsequential platforms. And look at them now. I personally know filmmakers making very small movies that have earned over $100,000 a quarter on Tubi alone, some more. And sure, this is not the norm and average earnings are much lower. Sad truth is most indie films don't earn much anywhere. That's just the way it is. So once again, why limit yourself? At the end of the day, my advice, I would just never count solely on self-distribution. I might make it part of an overall strategy, but for me, no full DIY. Check out some of my other videos on my distribution playlist, but whatever you do, keep making movies.